Hi guys, Dr. Rob Barrington here with some more nutrition advice. I overheard somebody in the week recommending that the safest cooking oil to use was probably rapeseed oil. And I disagreed with what they were saying, and it wasn't that in particular I wanted to talk about today. It was just the misconceptions about cooking with oils. I think it's something that is misunderstood by the general public, and there's a lot of misinformation about cooking oils on the internet and also in books. It's a bit of a minefield subject. You can go into it. It's a bit like a rabbit hole. You can go in as far as you want. But I just wanted to cover the basics in terms of those people who want to cook with oil, those people who want to look after their health. If I can just give some general recommendations if you are going to cook with oils, cook with fats, so that you can cook in the safest way possible in order to be able to maintain the healthiest food you can. Now, really, when we look at fats and cooking, it's detrimental to heat fats. Generally, fats, when we talk about fats, dietary fats, we're really talking about triglycerides. And triglycerides are a molecule of glycerol joined to 3 fatty acids. That forms the triglyceride molecule, which is what we call dietary fats. Now, dietary fats can be of different categories based on whether their fatty acid chains are of a particular type. They can be saturated, they can be monounsaturated, or they can be polyunsaturated. Saturated fats can be seen on cuts of meat. They're generally solid at room temperature, and they're called saturated because all of the possible reaction points on the chain, on the carbon chain, have been reacted with hydrogen, and therefore there are no double bonds. They're all single bonds, and there is no. This is one of the reasons that saturated fats are the best cooking fats, and that's because they're more stable. It's the double bonds on the fatty acid chain that are the points of reactivity where the fats can be oxidized and modified. Now, if you're starting from a point when all of the carbon chain has already been reacted with hydrogen, you're starting from a point of stability, and therefore the best fats that really should be used for cooking are saturated fats because they're more stable. You can apply heat to them, you can expose them to light, and generally they are less reactive than the other fats. But all fats can be modified and all fats can be oxidized. It's really just a product of how hot you get them and how long you expose them to heat. If you expose all fats to temperature and light as well, eventually they will oxidize and they will become rancid. But generally the saturated fats are the safest fats to heat and to cook with. If we add a single double bond into the fatty acid chain, we produce a monounsaturated fat. The most common dietary monounsaturated fat is probably olive oil, or oleic acid is the fatty acid. That's the most common monounsaturated fat, and we get most of our oleic acid, I would suggest, from meat and also from olive oil. If you look at olive oil, it's a liquid at room temperature, and that's because the fatty acids now have a double bond, and that double bond changes their chemistry. And when we heat with monounsaturated fatty acids, we have a double bond, and therefore we have a point that is very susceptible to oxidation. And so monounsaturated fats, monounsaturated fatty acids, are not as stable as saturated fats. If we take this further and we go to polyunsaturated fats have multiple double bonds. Some of the fish oils have 5 or 6 double bonds. That's 5 or 6 places that can react with oxygen and become modified, 5 or 6 places on the molecule that are susceptible to reaction, and therefore they're less stable than the monounsaturated fats. So if you put this in a timeline, the most stable fats are saturated fats, the second most stable group of fats are the monounsaturated fats, and the third group, which we generally call vegetable oils, because most of the polyunsaturated fats that we get come from vegetable oils, these are the polyunsaturated fats. Types of polyunsaturated fat that you might find: sunflower oil, you might come across corn oil, rapeseed oil is also very popular in supermarkets. Now, all things being equal, you'd want to cook with a saturated fat because it's more stable. However, there are other factors that influence the susceptibility of the fat to oxidation and whether it's healthy or not. Let's have a look at the polyunsaturated fats. Polyunsaturated fats are obviously the least stable oil. They're also the least likely that you will find them in an original state that has not been modified or oxidized already. If you go to the supermarket and you look at corn oil, you look at rapeseed oil, and you look at something like sunflower oil, they will all be in clear bottles. The oils will be very pale, and they will already have high amounts of oxidation products and modified fats within the oil. And the reason for that is the way they're manufactured. They're manufactured under light and heat conditions, and therefore they've already been modified and oxidized. So if you cook with those oils, you are going to be in a position where you're already consuming a dangerous, an unhealthy product. One of my major recommendations to anyone that's interested in the health is they avoid any amount of those types of oils. You shouldn't have any of those oils in your diet at all. If you're going to consume polyunsaturated oils, they really should be in their whole food form, so that you can get polyunsaturated fats from nuts and seeds. There's polyunsaturated fats in plant foods, but you shouldn't be consuming them in those supermarket oils, and that's because those oils are associated with diseases. They're associated with Western lifestyle diseases, and the fatty acids oxidize and they cause all sorts of health problems. They're associated with the causing of cancer. They're associated with an increased risk of cardiovascular disease, with increased risk of weight gain, with insulin resistance. The oxidized products that are in those oils are damaging to the health, and they should be avoided. So the recommendation that this person made to cook with rapeseed oil is actually incorrect, because you would assume that the rapeseed oil to start with was cold pressed, had not been modified from the original seed, and still contained adequate amounts of vitamin E. If you're cooking with rapeseed oil that you buy from a supermarket, you're already starting with an unhealthy product, and therefore you're already damaging your health. So really, you shouldn't be cooking in polyunsaturated oils, polyunsaturated fats anyway, and it's a fallacy that you could, because most of the ones that you buy in the supermarket would already have been modified during the manufacture process, and therefore they'd be unhealthy even if you didn't heat them. So avoid the polyunsaturated fats from supermarkets. Saturated fats for cooking, it's quite difficult to get hold of saturated fats for cooking. You don't tend to be able to buy them. Coconut oil, coconut fat is available, and you can cook with that, and obviously that's more stable than a lot of other fats, and if you buy unrefined coconut fat, it tends to have a lot of the phytonutrients that are in the coconut, and therefore you get high amounts of vitamin E that will protect the oil, because heating causes oxidation, but vitamin E is an antioxidant, so it will protect those fats from that oxidation process. So coconut oil is available as a saturated fat. Many people consider lard to be a saturated fat, but it's actually an unsaturated fat. Over 50% of the fatty acids in lard are unsaturated. It is quite a useful cooking fat. Lard and butter, they're saturated fats, and you can cook with them. They will become modified, they will become oxidized if you overheat them, but they're generally more stable than the polyunsaturated fats, and therefore they're worthy of considering. The monounsaturated fats, when we talk about monounsaturated fats, what we're really talking about is the monounsaturated olive oil, because that's the main monounsaturated fat that you would be able to go out and buy if you wanted to cook with a monounsaturated fat. There are others, but they're less widely available. Olive oil is interesting in that there are really two types of olive oil available. There is the extra virgin olive oil, and there is the refined olive oil. Now, the refined olive oil is in exactly the same state as most of the polyunsaturated supermarket oils. It's already been heated and exposed to light. It's usually quite a pale colour, and it does contain oxidized and modified fats, and it should be avoided. By law, to call something extra virgin olive oil, you have to have cold pressed it, which means that you have to have extracted the oil without any heat. Now, if you buy extra virgin olive oil, what you'll notice is that it's a much darker colour than many of the other vegetable oils, and that's because extra virgin olive oil tends to retain many of its phytonutrients. There are bits of olive within the oil. If you buy unfiltered olive oil, it will be even darker because it will have more particles in it. Now, those particles contain antioxidants. There's vitamin E in there. There are many other phytonutrients within the olive that are antioxidants, and therefore the oil is protected. It's got its natural plant protection. The plants put antioxidants in the oil because they are very easily oxidized, and the plant doesn't want to have oxidized oil in its metabolism, just as we don't want to have those oxidized oils either. So extra virgin olive oil is a much better, much higher quality food than all of the other vegetable oils. You can buy cold pressed oils of polyunsaturated and various other monounsaturated oils as well, but you generally have to go to a health food shop, and you have to be very careful because the labels can be very disingenuous with the information they give you, and they can try and mislead you. By law, if it says extra virgin olive oil on the label, it will be cold pressed and it will be a healthy product. Now, of all the oils to cook with, I would suggest that extra virgin olive oil is perhaps the one that you should pick, and there's a number of reasons for me suggesting that. Firstly, it's easier to cook with olive oil than it is with a saturated fat because it's liquid and it's an oil. Saturated fats are obviously solid. They do melt as soon as you heat them, but it is easier to use extra virgin olive oil because it's in a liquid state. The second reason is because it's very high in antioxidants, and therefore the fat is protected to some extent by those antioxidants. And the third reason is that it's a monounsaturated fat, and therefore it's less susceptible to oxidation than the polyunsaturated fats. So that's really where an overview of the cooking process of using fats. Now, if you want to lower the temperature of the fats, in other words, you want to decrease the temperature, you can put water in with the fat, and that will lower the temperature of the fat. It will reduce some of the smoke, and that will be another way that you can protect the oil. If you can cook the food for a shorter period as time as well, that is another way to be able to protect the oils from the heat, because obviously the longer you expose them, the more likely they are to be oxidized. Another very good solution is to put antioxidants in with your food. If you cook a lot of vegetables, for example, and you pan fry them, and you fry them quickly in something like olive oil, you will actually have antioxidants in there already, and this may be one of the reasons that quick pan frying of vegetables is actually not seen as being too detrimental to the health. If you use a healthy oil to cook them, and you also use lots of fruits and vegetables, they're cut up into small amounts, they're exposed to the temperatures, but they have antioxidants in them, and that will to some extent protect the oil that's there, and stop some of the modification to the food that occurs when it's exposed to heat. Herbs are very good as well. If you add herbs, something like rosemary, all of the herbs really have got very, very high antioxidant content. They're very useful for cooking. If you add herbs to your food, then not only do they give it flavour, I would suspect that the traditional reason that a lot of herbs are added to food for cooking is because it protects the food from the damaging effects of heat. That has been shown scientifically to be effective. They obviously add flavour to the food as well, but when you look at a lot of these things that are done traditionally, they're usually done for health reasons, and I would suggest that adding herbs to food that's being cooked actually protects the food from oxidation. And it's not just fats that get oxidized. Protein is particularly susceptible to being modified when it's heated. The browning that you get on the outside of meat, for example, when you barbecue it, that's carcinogenic. It's a modified form of the protein. It's a substance you don't want to eat, and if you can reduce that burning, smoke, very high temperatures, those are the things that are going to damage your health when you eat those foods. So really you want to minimise those effects and be sensible in your choice of cooking oils. So in terms of recommending rapeseed oil for cooking as the most effective vegetable oil, I disagree. I think the most effective form vegetable oil for cooking is olive oil, and olive oil has to be extra virgin olive oil. But the best form, the best way to cook is with a saturated fat, so that means butter, to a certain extent lard, although it's not really a true saturated fat, and perhaps coconut oil. And if you can cook your food without fat, if you can boil it, for example, poaching eggs, and then if you want fat on your food, put the extra virgin olive oil on the food after you've cooked it, so you get the taste of the fat, but you're not exposing that fat to the heat, and that's not going to cause oxidation of the fat, and then you're obviously going to reduce the amount of oxidized modified fats that you have in your diet. So I hope that was useful. Look into this. It is a minefield, and I've only just skimmed the surface. But really, avoid the polyunsaturated fats. Avoid the supermarket fats. Cook with saturated fats if you can, and if you can't, then extra virgin olive oil is the best vegetable oil to cook with. I hope that was helpful. If you've got any comments on this video, please leave them in the comments box below. I will reply to you as I always do, and I will see you next week for another video. And in the meantime, take care.